Welcome to Shockaholic, where we discuss the shocking sides of cinema. And today we're going to talk about all things 80s horror as I review In Search of Darkness, Part 2. Hey everybody, my name is Chandler Bullock. I'm your host today, and we're going to be talking about a review for a new documentary that has just come out a few months ago called In Search of Darkness Part 2. Now, the original In Search of Darkness you can watch currently on the Shudder channel. So if you go to Shudder and you have an account, you can watch the original there. But this new edition of this second part to In Search of Darkness, is available for Blu Ray and DVD release. And I had the blessing to be offered a screener to discuss it with all of you and to give a quick review, and especially because they're having a special flash sale right now. So if you go to 80shorrordoc.com, you will find the information that you need for this flash sale that's going on until February 14th. But let's talk a little bit about the documentary. As I mentioned in my intro, we're going to talk about 1980s horror. That is what this thing is all about. It's a continuation from the very first documentary. Now, I haven't had the pleasure of checking that one out just yet. I decided to go into this one a little bit blind so that I could look at it at its own merits, see if it references the original, anything like that. And I can say that if you haven't checked out the original one and you only are interested in checking this out, or if you just want to get in on the sale, do not fret. It does not work in a way that you would at all be lost or anything like that. What it seems to me is they've taken a lot of the footage that they took for the original documentary, saw how much more they had, and continued with a second part to it. I think they've also added a few new interviews here and there as well, since there are a few names that pop up that seem a little bit more recent to me than the names that they had from the original one, but I haven't seen the full one. Now, this is a 4.5 hour long documentary. So for those of you who have seen Never Sleep Again, the Nightmare on Elm Street documentary, or I believe his name was Jason is the other one that's about Friday the 13th. Those are very long 4 to 6 hour documentaries, but those are broken up with the different films as a kind of mini documentary style. This one's done similarly, but it really is just one cohesive whole. So it's a long slog, but you can cut it up if you want to. They do end particular segments. Fortunately, none of these seem to have to do with the first In Search of Darkness much anyway, so you're not really missing out if you were to stop and continue. They don't overlap the different details. What they've done is they've actually separated it per year throughout the 1980s, so 80, 81, 82, 83, and so on, and to make sure it's not just a dry year sort of format, they also throw in some sort of like moments where they zoom in to specific aspects of 1980s horror. So for instance, they talk about giallo films for about 5 to 10 minutes. There's one moment where they're talking about music. There's another point where they're talking about individual actors or stars within the horror realm. Tom Savini has a very long segment where he talks about how he got into FX and what drove him. They talk about acting in specific as well. I love that as somebody who started as an actor. It was really nice to hear 80s stars talking about the craft the way a lot of people nowadays talk about their craft. A lot of these people that they have on their cast list are actually dedicated to the craft of acting and have very just broad backgrounds in acting, a lot of passion for it, and various stories as well. Some people wanted to be archaeologists. Some people always wanted to be actors. In Tom Savini's case, he wanted to be an actor. I won't go too much into all this, but there are individual actors who get their individual focuses, other people talking about their work. I do want to read a brief list of the people that you will see in this documentary, just in case this entices you. Now, this is a very short list. I've separated it between horror legends and horror critics and fans, because some of the fans are more famous people who are very famously fans of horror. But from the horror legends, we have Tom Savini, Cassandra Peterson, Linnea Quigley, Jeffrey Combs, John Carpenter, Barbara Crampton, Tom Atkins, Nancy Allen, Clancy Brown, Nick Castle, Joe Dante, Goretta, Jackie Kong, the late great Stuart Gordon, and more. We also have fans such as Chris Jericho and Corey Taylor, and critics and fellow, media people, YouTubers such as myself. You have James A. Janice, Heather Wixton, Phil Nobel Jr., and James Rolfe, aka Cinemassacre, amongst other names as well. So there's a plethora of people here that you would recognize from different walks of life and different parts of the horror sphere. I found that very nice. Some of these people are people that I actually communicate with from time to time on Twitter, or at the very least I follow them and I follow their careers. So to hear them talk a little bit more about their observations and the things that they feel and noticed about horror growing up was quite nice. That's the highest point of this documentary, by the way. I think that what they focused on to its height was how people engage with horror. What do we get out of it? What do we feel? Different types of horror too. They take, your schlocky sort of crass, intense, violent horror films from that time, and they also take your more fun horror, but also somewhere in between, your more art housey style horror, and talk about what they felt. Not just, oh, this was cool or this was terrible, but they go more into detail of whether it shook them up or made them happy or maybe taught themselves something about themselves, which for me was the big takeaway. I loved that. I don't consider this much of a spoiler. It's a documentary, but one of the sign-off things they had was everybody talking about this kind of new wave we have with horror criticism of people such as myself who like to talk more about social issues, but also more about the self and how we tend to either project ourselves into the characters within horror, or at the very least we recognize ourselves and we either learn things, or at the very least we learn that we're not alone in feeling that way. Because if somebody can write that character or perform that character and you feel connected to it, then you know that you're not alone. On the other side of this, you also have the fact that victims within horror films tend to elicit empathy from us, that we can put ourselves in their shoes. We can see their problems and their situations, but from a distance, safely, and due to that, we can also feel a bit of maybe catharsis, but not necessarily. There are people on this panel of people who have a bit of a back and forth, not directly to each other, but it's edited very nicely by Samuel Way is the editor of this, who does a bang-up job. Through the editing, he makes it look a lot like people are directly responding to each other sometimes, and it's beautiful. This is a wonderful looking documentary, high class. I can see why Shudder picked up the first one if it looks anything like this. So very happy with that. Now, there are one or two cons about the documentary I would like to talk about, though. So everything here looks nice and sleek. It's edited really well. I think that everybody who's being interviewed gives phenomenal answers, and I can imagine there's footage that is not being shown here, but that's where some of my complaints come from. The one thing that kept kind of irking me a little bit was I couldn't tell what the structure of the documentary was at times. It really felt to me as if they were being thrown some random questions every now and then, like very open questions. So it kind of felt at times that the documentary didn't choose films because it really wanted to talk about them, but that it more so that maybe they were asking them questions about, hey, what is a movie from this year you would like to talk about? Which is nice, but it also made it to where the people that we saw talking were kind of thrown about, a bit kind of sporadically sprinkled about, because I can imagine that some people have knowledge on some films and other people don't have knowledge on those films. So then you can't show any footage from them because they go, oh no, I haven't seen that, or oh, I'm not an expert on that one. Granted, doing this also allowed them to showcase films that you would often not talk about, go a little bit on the off-beaten path there. So sometimes we're going to be focusing on something like The Beast Within, other times we're going to be focusing on Beetlejuice. So it really depended on the year and what movies they had to offer, I think. It was clear with some of the answers that they were asked about specific films and happened to know what movie that was or what they wanted to talk about with the film. But I also still don't know if it was structured in a way that, it was preemptively set up with those questions, or if maybe they had discussed what movies from that year do you know more about, and then they gave an answer, and they probably re-recorded it with a direct question about that film. I don't really know. I do know that director and writer David Weiner did a great job in general. I think that the way that people were talking was very open and freeing, and you can tell that David had a slight focus on more social issues. Again, I haven't seen the original documentary, so I don't know if that was a thing in the original documentary, but I know that in this one it is. That's what's in there a lot. A lot more focus on trans representation in horror, especially since they're going to talk about Dress to Kill. And they talk a bit more about black horror, Italian horror, and just the general landscape in the 1980s, the AIDS epidemic, so on and so forth. And that was a really cool touch. I actually quite enjoyed that a lot. So is it worth the price tag? Well, let's look at what you get for the price tag. The price tag is $69.99 right now, as it's on its flash sale. So this is a second sale since the time that was originally released. At midnight on February 14th, the sale will end and you will not be able to purchase it anymore. But for $69.99, you're going to get the Blu Ray. You're going to get 3 posters, an enamel pen, digital versions of part 1 and 2 of the documentary, a digital soundtrack, and a community season pass to their Discord. Now, this is a 12-month pass to their Discord that will have other features as well. You will actually have access to videos for micro interviews with more people that they didn't put into the documentary, people that they've interviewed since through digital mediums. And I think in some case, they're actually going to have people who do live chats with people as well, so Q&As, things of this nature. So I think that, yes, it is worth it. It's definitely worth it just for the Blu Ray alone. I think $69.99, though it feels a little steep, it's a 4.5-hour documentary with just so many people that you're going to love and you're going to know really well. And hearing some of their insights, I think, is really valuable for a lot of people. So if you're an 80s horror fan, you want something a little glossier to look at, you want to have some of your favorite people and a more up-to-date roster of people as well. Also, one of the benefits, if you're a huge horror fan, you know, I think seeing somebody like Stuart Gordon do one of his final interviews before he passed away, it made it really valuable for me. I was quite emotional at those moments. They don't make a big deal out of it. They do dedicate it to him, but he's just featured there to answer the questions that he was asked, and I really enjoyed that. So I think there's a lot to get out of this. I think it's worth the bang for your buck. So please, if you will, go to 80shorrordoc.com. So it's 80s horrordoc.com and check out their sale. So again, thank you so much to the people behind this documentary for sending a screener my way so that I could do this review. Thank you all for watching this review. This will be a short one. I don't really have much more to say because I can't really spoil too much from a 4.5-hour documentary, but I will say that from the bottom of my heart, I'm very grateful for all of you watching this. I hope you're all safe, and I hope you're all having a wonderful time. Until next time, keep shocking.